Let me start the conversation by welcoming Mr. Singhania. Mr.
Thank you.
Singhania, good to have you at this BW Dialogue. And let me start by asking you, how have been the last 27 months for you, both personally and professionally?
So, firstly, thank you for having me. I think you're referring to the 27 months of COVID, which have been extremely tough for anybody. Uh, as you know, May 19, the world shut down, and it's been brutal, specifically for companies like us, which on the sales side, the shops were closed. On the manufacturing side, you carried large overheads. So, yeah, I mean, personally, I think it taught me a lot to stay focused because to win in life, you have to first win in the mind and you have to condition your mind to win. And if you lost in the mind, you lose the battle altogether. So it was a really challenging time, but I think Raymond as an organization has withstood the COVID and we've come out stronger. So, yeah, here we are today in a much, much stronger place. And I'm happy to be here.
You know, it's interesting when you ask an entrepreneur who owns and runs a business. I asked you about personal, professional life, and really the entrepreneur tend to focus a lot. There's a very thin difference or a thin line between what is personal, professional in the sense of where you spend your time. You spend most of your time on your work. So clearly, you've been the time of last 27 months was about focus. It was about resilience, and it was about bouncing back. And I'm sure the discipline that a lot of companies, including yours, have imbibed in terms of costs, in terms of business restructuring, will yield results over the next few months and years. Now, let me focus on the fact that Raymond is in its 97th year. In 3 years, you'll be a 100-year-old business, a 100-year-old brand. Tell me, when you think of Raymond and you think of its huge legacy, I mean, it has a huge legacy. How do you want to leverage that legacy beyond what you're doing right now? The world has changed in the last 27 months. You talked about stores being closed, but e-commerce and D2C brands have really blossomed in the last 27 months. So how do you build on from here? And I want to ask you a specific question. A senior executive from Levers quit and joined Godrej. And in one day, the Godrej market cap rose by 21,000 crores. So clearly today, good managerial talent and good governance can really create value. So I've asked you two questions. One, how do you plan to build on this legacy from here on? And second, in terms of really the strong business and strong brand that you have, how do we see the future?
Sure, Dr. Patra, I think you've asked too many questions. I'll try and attempt to answer some of them because it was a long question. But so what is the legacy that we want to leave behind? I think Raymond stands for quality, trust, and excellence, and really build on that. It's a 97-year-old brand with a 19-year-old heart. And, we're 3 years from our 100 runs, but, that's just the beginning of high eminence. It's people focus on the 100 years, we focus on eternity. I always say Raymond is a national asset. We're only caretakers of that. And I think we own the brand, we caretake the brand for every individual who's invested in it as a customer, as a shareholder, as an employee. And that's really the power of this brand. Where do we see ourselves? I think, we've built a very strong real estate business now. And I think Raymond is a brand for the masses of India, whether it is in the fabric business or whether it is in the real estate business. And, people have apnaud our brand. They say, ye hamara brand hai, ye hamara Raymond hai. And it's something very powerful. It's very difficult to explain. And I think that's where the legacy and the heritage of this brand will continue.
Fantastic. So you're leveraging the brand to be able to do businesses because you have a large land bank. So, really that's a big asset that you bring and that can be unlocked by developing it. Of course, you build brand extensions. Now, I also asked about the fact that, most organizations, whether in supply chain or on the, commerce side, the e-commerce business for most FMCGs was a single digit. But for some in the last 27 months, even in categories like chocolate, which is really, less value, the digital commerce has grown to 2 digit in some significant on a very large top line. So what are your plans in terms of leveraging your brand in and using all the channels? We use omni-channel, but primarily using digital as a big way to grow.
You see, there's a lot of talk about digital, and people talk about digital, because that's what they spoke about because there was no physical retail. But if you look at it today, I think the consumer was waiting to get out there and go back to real life. Now, I remember during the COVID time, there was a Zoom call I did, and there was somebody in China from a consultancy. I'm so happy that COVID has happened. I'm on Zoom, and I'm so happy to sit at home and I can get used to this life. And I said, I can't wait for the day this is over and get back to my normal life. And so some people have got used to COVID, but I think if you go to the malls, you go to the theaters, you look at travel today, if you look at just travel and tourism, you can't get a hotel room anywhere, you can't get a flight ticket anywhere, you can't get anything. That's because people have gone back to normal life. And if you go to the malls, shopping is happening in the malls, movie theaters are back up to speed. Airlines, you can't get a ticket. I mean, a 60, 70,000 rupee ticket, Bombay, London is today 1,50,000 rupees. That just shows clear lack of capacity and huge demand. If you take, I was talking to somebody yesterday, he said a normal hotel room today in London and five-star hotel is £1,200, which should be £300. So it's just crazy the amount the world is back to normal.
Absolutely.
And like you said, supply chain, supply chain is dramatically affected because, I was talking to a friend of mine who makes gearboxes, and he said, I'm stuck because of a 5-cent screw. So, the screw manufacturer has probably gone bankrupt, and, you disrupt a $1,000 gearbox or $2,000 gearbox for a 5-cent screw. So these disruptions are there, but I think the world is coming back to normal.
Absolutely. I agree that whether you look at all contact businesses, they're back fully. There is huge demand, and the supply is not that much. Hence the price escalation in most cases that you refer to, whether it's airline, whether it's hotel, you go to restaurant, malls, they're full on. So the physical retail is not going anywhere, but you got to build layers on top of it of digital. Now, in your first opening remarks, you talk about the fact that I learned a lot. This is a conversation about leadership. What did you learn in the last 27 months or got reinforced? I can't imagine you learning something new, but it is bringing back the focus, and it's you use the word focus yourself. But what did you learn in the last 27 months that you can share with our readers and our viewers?
So I think, the first comment is not learn something new. I think we learn something new every day. You must be open in your mind, and you must learn something new every day. That's the road to growth. Number two, I think the biggest win or the biggest learning through the mindset was to have a positive mindset, to just stay focused and say, we will win. We're not going to fall by the wayside. It was challenging times. We went through some very, very challenging times. But to stay the course and say, in your mind, I strongly believe that if you win in the mind, you win in the field. If you take motor car racing, which is what I do, and there's 1 second gap between the top 15 guys, it's just really the machinery is the same, drivers same. It's whose mind is stronger. And that's what the pressure and stress, it's what is pressure and stress? It's overcoming that is winning in the mind.
So clearly you're saying stay optimistic, stay focused, learn new things every day, and not have cobwebs in your brain that this can't happen, that can't happen. I think a lot of us went back to the drawing stage. My last question before I bring in Jyotsna. In the last few weeks, there's been news that you're selling part of your consumer business, or discussing selling part of your consumer business to a D2C brand. I know you're a listed entity, so you have to be careful in what you say. But can you give us some inputs on where that is headed?
Well, the company does not comment on market speculation.
Good. Since you didn't answer this question, and I did ask you, and I said it's my last question before I bring in Jyotsna. If you had to make 3 predictions for the future in terms of where businesses are headed and what is the change in the entrepreneurial mindset because of the last 27 months?
Well, it's difficult to make 3 predictions, but if I see India as so you could say India and abroad, I would look at that too. I think the US and UK and Europe are going to have a very, very tough time. And I think India has found its place in the sun. I'm very optimistic about India, more than I've ever been. I think the policies of Modi ji have been fantastic. He's doing a great job. And I think, I mean, the war between Ukraine and Russia is going to pan out into Europe. Europe is going to have a tough time if if Russia just shuts off the gas to Germany, 40 to 50% of manufacturing in Germany will close down. And UK is already facing massive labor shortages. So I think the future for Europe and America is a little more bleak. I think for India, because we're a large consumption-driven economy, is strong. I am optimistic.
Absolutely. Notwithstanding the currency fluctuation, which has taken a toll on the Indian rupee, the Indian growth story continues to be very robust. And out of the pandemic, we've only grown stronger because our ambition has become bigger, and we've found alternate solutions to some of the issues in supply chain we saw in various sectors. So clearly, I agree with you that India is bound to grow because of the great domestic growth sentiment it has and the market that it has. I'd like to bring in Jyotsna into the conversation. Jyotsna, you and Mr. Singhania.
Thank you, Mr. Ratra. Good evening, Mr. Singhania. So I would like to talk a little bit about the outlook of the textile sector. We want to get your opinion on what are the future trends that we can see that will come up in the textile sector.
That's a very large open-ended question, because the textile sector per se, I mean, fabric consumption is going to go up in this country because there are 1 billion plus people.
Yeah.
And on the export side, I think India is in a good place because the China plus one strategy is playing out very well, because European, American, Japanese customers are focused on wanting to get another source of supply. They don't want to get stuck with China. I mean, today I was hearing China's locked down 6 more cities, and they can't afford that. The whole supply chain gets disrupted. So we are seeing some positive traction in that, and I think it's a good thing.
Right. So moving on, I mean, of course, you have spoken about how the brand, you're focused on it and it's going to grow. Let's talk a little bit about your foray into the realty sector. Tell us a little bit about that. Is that just residential? Is that, also commercial spaces?
So primarily Raymond had historic land in Thana, and we decided to develop. We initially thought to sell it, but we were not getting the correct offer. So we decided to develop it ourselves.
Yeah.
We have gone into the affordable plus housing segment, which is the mass, which is where the belly of the market is. And today, with God's grace, the project is doing very well. It's the number 1 project in the micro market of Thana. And having done that, you must have read in the papers, we've signed a JDA for another project in Bandra East.
Yeah.
So one by one, we're enhancing this business of ours. And I'm reasonably sure that real estate will become a very important part of our business.
So how do you think that the group will stand out when it comes to real estate? What are the key factors that, will...
You see, India has to be built. And there's enough place for 50 top developers. I mean, if you look at the size and scale of India, and India has to be built. So, real estate is going to be a very important part of our business. We built this business just through the pandemic. We built a good reputation, good sales traction. So I don't see any reason why we should not be able to take this to the next level.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about, your focus on CSR, and we'll talk a little bit about the Singhania School. Can you tell us about that?
So the Singhania School has been number 1 in the country for the last 5 years. And we've, in the last 1 year, accelerated our growth to do more schools. I'm happy to tell you that tomorrow we're taking over a school in Tirupati. I'll be inaugurating that tomorrow in Tirupati. And, it'll just enhance the quality of education in that educational institute. Similarly, we're going through the management contract route for schools.
Yeah.
I think over the next year, we should take at least 6 more schools. And I have a personal vision that I want to educate 100,000 children physically in not so distant a future. Currently, we're already at 20,000 children. And we see a trajectory, at least in 2025, I believe we should be at least between 40 to 50,000 students. So it'll be a very large activity for us, but it's a CSR activity.
Yeah.
It's run by our trust, but I think imparting good quality education at a high level is really building India, and it's something we want to give back to society.
That's wonderful. That's great. Let's talk a little bit about your tailoring hubs as well. So, I mean, you're sort of very focused on that. Tell us about that. Tell our viewers about that.
Tailoring is a dying art, so we started our tailoring hubs, and it's a great place for some, guy to get some knowledge from us on tailoring, work in our tailoring hubs, and then, we buy back all the production. So his sales are committed, he gets a livelihood. It's again, a great project that's worked for us.
Right. Now I would like to move on to your passion, racing. Tell us how you got into it and what are the, learnings from it that you apply. You did mention a little bit earlier, when you were talking to Dr. Batra, but let's go into that a little bit. And how do you sort of see some key leadership skills that, come out of that sport?
I got into racing when I was a kid and I really enjoyed it. I raced all the way up to 5 years ago. I think a couple of things that come out of it. Racing is very quick. So your decision-making process has to be very quick. It trains your mind to work very quickly.
Yeah.
Number two, I think the best fallout of racing was that because I was racing, I had to be fit, and that put me into a very strong physical fitness regime. And that's, if you're fit, your mind is fit, your body is fit, then you're that much more fit at work. You have the energy to work long hours when you're not racing. And fitness then becomes a way of your life.
And there's also the discipline, isn't it?
It's all the discipline that comes with it. And, if you bring fitness and discipline to your workplace, chances are you'll succeed better.
Yes. So I know that you spoke about this earlier, but there's something I wanted to ask you. When we spoke about learnings from COVID, and then, companies basically from COVID, they changed their people management structure, they changed their strategy for their organization. Some people totally overhauled and went the digital route. What is it that your group really did after COVID? What were the learnings for the group?
But there were several. One, we brought our cost structure down significantly. We made the organization much leaner, and we just learned to deal with, we learned in every aspect to learn a different way to do business.
Yeah.
For example, a sales show went online. Look at the way we are communicating today. We're going through Zoom. 2.5 years ago, you would never have dreamt of doing an interview like this. You can today get 200 people in 30 minutes on a call and get done with it. So there's so many changes that have come about, and your cost structure has changed. And, I think you find different ways to do business.
Right. So moving on, before I bring in a colleague, what are the qualities of a good leader?
There got to be many qualities of a good leader, but I think you got to really be a people's person and listen to what others have to say.
Right. I'm going to bring in my colleague Vasudha, who had a few questions as well. Vasudha?
Thank you, Jyotsna. Thank you, Mrs. Singhania. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I was just listening in on your conversation, and it seems like you've covered most of the things. But I did want to ask you a little bit about, a lot has happened over the pandemic, right? And like you mentioned yourself, like your business saw a lot of changes. Some made you change your tactics, some not so much. But what post-pandemic trends are you observing now?
Well, I think post-pandemic, there's a lot of revenge spending. There's a lot of pent-up demand coming out. And I think people are just happy to go back to life. And, people are back out there. And it's good to see the world is back to normal if, maybe 15% more than normal.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I did want to ask you a little bit because startups was a really major thing during the pandemic. We saw so many companies kind of take off. And now we're starting to see a lot of layoffs and, a lot of, collaborations and, a lot of companies are sort of merging together. What is your take on that?
That's an evolution of life and it's an evolution of business, and there's cycles for every different business. So I guess that startups are going through that cycle. I'm not very familiar with startups, but I guess it is what it is.
Yeah, no, fair enough. But I do cover the education space, and hearing about Singhania schools was very interesting. Being in the education space, what are some key things that you have to keep in mind? How is it different from other markets that you have entered?
When you're educating people, it's a very sensitive area. You got to deal with, like in our main school, we deal with 14,000 parents, and they trust their kids with you. And you take the trust is one thing. You take the trust of somebody's kid, you just got to be that much more sensitive. And they trust in you to build their kid's future. And it's a very big responsibility. You've got to be cognizant of that fact.
Yeah, the stakes are a lot higher when you're in that sector. And right now, skilling is such a major thing. And is that something you're kind of also incorporating into the schools themselves, or is that something that you need for?
Well, our school imparts many skills. They do, a lot of the extracurricular activities, and we encourage them to do that. So, we want to create children that are well-rounded, that have got a lot of skill sets, and so they have a lot of stuff in the school, and that's what I think makes our school number one in the country.
Is there anything from your own upbringing or you're doing your own education that you kind of wished you kind of had that you have sort of incorporated into your own schools?
Well, I think in the old days, the schooling was very different. Today, it's very different. You didn't have a computer in those days. Today, with the computer, I see the kind of courses that my kids do in terms of skilling. It's Latin to me, but they're brought up on a different base.
Yeah. No, I mean, same here. I mean, I haven't been out of school that long, but it feels like forever as far as the curriculum, as far as the pedagogy goes. And there's definitely a lot of things I see in schools where I feel like, well, that would have been nice to kind of experience too. But it's good to see the younger generation getting these kinds of opportunities. Have you had the hybrid kind of teaching going on? Or what is your take on hybrid teaching or even working for that matter? Since that was a big stage.
What do you mean by hybrid teaching?
Hybrid sort of some people working from home, working online. Some people come into office.
No, I think in our company, I probably do a Zoom call once a month. It was probably my first Zoom call in a month. I don't know why it's not physical, but we're back to 100%. I would say 99.9% back to physical work.
All right. So no hybrid for Raymond. Excellent. And do you have, when you are taking in new applicants, what is something that you look for in new people who are entering your company? Do you have any?
I only interview the senior level people, but I'm looking for the intellect, the commitment, the desire to join me. Are you motivated, not motivated? So there are a lot of things we look for.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely, I mean, you're right. That's something that you definitely look for in management positions. And since this is a leadership conversation, on a leadership scale, because leadership can mean a lot of different things, but what is it that specifically you kind of hone in on?
No, I mean, to be a good leader, you've got to have multi-skills, but I think you've got to be able to deal with people around you. You've got to be able to lead them.
It's a people business in the end of the day.
At the end of the day, you've got to listen to people and then make the right decisions. The smartest guy in the room is the collective wisdom of the group.
Was that difficult during this pandemic when everyone was forced to sort of distance themselves?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I already said so. The pandemic was brutal.
Yeah. And we're still discovering the ways in which it kind of impacted our society as a whole.
I don't think we've seen the full impact yet because, I mean, if you just take supply chain, for example, it's still pretty bad.
And is there any kind of measures you're kind of putting into place in case we have to kind of go into that situation again?
Well, every company is sort of pushing themselves. God forbid you have to go into that space again.
Yeah, that's true. Well, thank you so much, Mr.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I do know, we still have like about 10 minutes, and I know Mr.
No, I don't have 10 minutes.
Oh,
I got like literally a minute because I got my next meeting at 5 o'clock.
All right, then I think we can conclude here.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us today and answering all our questions. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.